Hey, Drew, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Really good to see your face and have some time to hang out and catch up a little bit. I've been really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, how are things in Georgia these days? Hot?
They're hot. They're hot. We're trying to stay cool and yeah, but enjoying all that summer has to offer right
Yeah,
now.
that's great. The idea of this whole podcast thing for me was just to kind of as a chance to connect with a lot of people that I've either played music with over the years or people maybe that have influenced me along the way. And I feel like you and I have not gotten to play as much music together as I would have liked or like. I'll say it in the present tense, but certainly left a big impact on me, the way you play and the way I've enjoyed getting to play with you. So it's really good to kind of just sit down and hear your story about how you got to be where you are.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. Feel like I was trying to explain that to somebody. It's like, yeah, I used to play with him, and circumstances as they were, kind of just stopped, and I really wish that had gone differently.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was, this that the drummer bass player relationship is so vital for the
Yeah.
success or failure of a band. And for those who are listening, I was playing weekly at Mount Pisgah at a church in Atlanta, and you subbed there from time to time. I think maybe before I started playing there, and then you subbed in one week, and we had never met. I'd heard about you, and it was like you started playing, and it was like, oh, okay, well, this is going to be just fine. It was just an immediate like, okay, yeah, I know where this guy likes to play, and it was like love at first sight, and just wanted to play as much as we could after that. And yeah, just really dig your playing, man. Yeah. So I want to go back, kind of just get some history on you about, because I know you've had a lot of really cool stops along the way in your percussion career, and have done some really cool things that I can't wait to dig in and talk about. But so how did it all start for you? I know you come from a musical family, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. My dad is a drummer percussionist, and he was a band director also. And so I started playing, unofficially, not really studying, but playing. I mean, from at least like age 3, I started like actually trying to play some stuff.
Yeah.
And my dad had a wedding and party band in the Atlanta area, and Tim was kind of the person that kind of, there were different pieces in that, but my dad and Tim were kind of always the members of that band. And he started bringing me on gigs, which I think their earliest regular gigs, they played outside of Georgia Tech home football games.
Really?
They were like set up because they knew Bucky Johnson, who was the band director there. There was some, I don't even know what the connection was, but they kind of used that as we play this regular gig to try to, get other places to play and stuff like that. So they would play there, and he would bring me to the gigs, and I don't exactly know how it started happening, but that he would give me, a set of claves or something to just sit behind the drum set. And I mean, more is just to like, hey, don't run off and get lost. Probably, I mean, like I joke now that it was like this amazing musical experience for me at a young age, but really it was just a lack of childcare. Looking at it from a dad's perspective
Sure.
now, but yeah, I don't know exactly what possessed him to do this, but there was like some claves and maybe a shaker, and just like, here, you can kind of play along, and pretty early on, he was like, oh, like you're able to like sit back here and like play along with an entire song, which probably not every 5-year-old would have the attention span or whatever to do that, but I was just kind of that personality type, I guess. And so it kind of grew from there, and by the time I was like 8, he had bought me a set of like student congas,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a whole little like Power V percussion set up next to his drums, and I went to every gig. I came on every single gig, whether it was prudent for me to do so or not. I was at plenty of overserved weddings as a minor, and stuff like that. But also in a ton of really cool places, playing with some really serious musicians. When I was still in elementary school,
Wow.
and it's just kind of a weird situation, but I've done a lot of looking back on that as kind of the start of my playing, and obviously nobody was reading anything, so I wasn't either. So I didn't think anything of that. I was just like, yeah, they just know all these songs, so I guess you're just supposed to know all these songs. And so I learned them. I mean, I didn't have to learn the changes to them or things like that, but I had to learn form, and I had to learn how to feel different musicians and the
Right.
way they play and that kind of thing, and stops and starts and all kinds of stuff. And was doing that, and getting an insane amount of exposure to music in a really strange setting from a really early age.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's really cool. And there's so much of the part of the gig that's, I guess you could call the soft skills of the gig, that you were learning, what a head start you were getting of just kind of being in that atmosphere and seeing how the load in happened and all of that, the sound check. And when a lot of players that are coming up are pretty green with that stuff, you had a huge, huge head start on that kind of thing.
yeah, it was almost like, it was reversed a little bit, that I had so much experience with that. And as my age increased, I was able to get my playing ability
Yeah.
up to like my ears were at a certain level, and then my musical ability kind of got to match it.
Yeah.
But yeah, all sorts of, from, being early on time to gigs and double checking load ins and load outs and like all that kind of stuff that is so vital to being a working musician,
Sure.
for, practicality's sake. That stuff was just like, eating your vegetables,
Right.
for me,
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
was just like, yeah, that's what you do.
Yeah. Did he start teaching you privately at?
No, actually, I mean, a little bit, but when I got to the point where he was like, you really should be studying somebody, there was a kind of a delineation there that I wasn't going to take formal lessons with him. And so that's when I started taking lessons from John LaMattina. And that's how I got started, at his studio. And I think at the time my dad was actually teaching Michael LaMattina lessons. It was like
Really?
a different phases, but trading,
Oh,
because
that's really
John
funny.
was like, yeah, I'm not going to teach my son, and you don't want to teach your son. So there was some sort of a trade there, at some point, which
I, I,
which
I just interviewed Michael like 2 weeks ago.
oh yeah,
Yeah, I sure did.
that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. And I'm so glad that he posts all these killer excerpt videos of him playing, just because I get to hear him play, because he's such a monster.
Oh,
and
I met him I think
and
in 8th grade, and like I think we were in district honor band together, and I met him, and we played a lot. We did like Atlanta Youth Wind Symphony and a few things when we were in high school, and yeah, I mean, just
yeah,
like
so
you,
I
man.
eventually got to take plenty of lessons from him too, at his house, his
Right.
dad's studio. And yeah, so I still started taking lessons before, like actual band and school started in 6th grade. So there wasn't any like, let's see, what am I going to play? I was already kind of pretty far
Sure.
along that path.
Where did you go to high school?
Brookwood
You
High
went to
School.
Brookwood, so you did go to
Yeah,
Brookwood as well.
yeah,
Okay.
it's the same school. And honestly, there's a lot of really talented musicians in general that have come through there, but specifically drummers and percussionists. And I think LaMattina Studio has a lot to do with that,
Sure.
because just from his kids alone, much less the kind of student teacher thing he had going there, he would always have another person teaching lessons there, at the same time as him. So you kind of get two perspectives. And so there was always, once you got to a certain point in your playing and you were able to do it, if you wanted to, there was the option of you teaching there.
Wow.
And so it creates this whole like community
Hmm.
of players that was kind of always feeding itself, it seems like,
Yeah.
and so there were always people, there were always, some killer drum set players coming through there, and people that were doing stuff like the youth symphony and the youth wind symphony
Yeah.
and the drumline, being kind of its own community there too. There was always a lot of really, really strong players in that area.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was in high school, seeing Brookwood's. I saw a percussion ensemble performance. I saw an indoor drum line, and just a level above other high schools in the area. Just like you're saying, an incredible pool of percussion talent coming out of one school. I mean, you could tell that it was just deep learning and teaching going on there.
Yeah. And I think there was always like a level of, as far as the drumline specifically stuff, there was kind of always the thing where we were playing stuff that high schoolers had no business trying to play. And it wasn't like we were like a drum corps level or anything like that, but there was that sort of like aspiration always. It was always trying to like push towards that, and so that made it a lot of fun.
Yeah. Were you doing, so in your lessons, were you doing kind of the full spectrum of percussion, marimba, snare drum, all of that, or is it mostly?
Yeah. I mean, it was mostly drum set and snare drum focused, but there was always at least some keyboard percussion in there. He didn't do any timpani in that studio, so any of the timpani lessons I ever had were elsewhere with other people, kind of one-off things.
Yeah, I remember going over to their house one time, and I believe it was the first time I'd ever been to someone's house that had a marimba. And I was like, wow, they have a marimba at their house. How cool is that?
It's like, who does that? Yeah. It's like, no, that you're not allowed to, right? Like, you can't even, how do you even fit it through the door? Like,
right.
There it is.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Our closest thing to it was right as the pandemic was starting. Skylar had the foresight to say, I want to borrow a marimba from the school. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So we went, and he disassembled it, and we brought it home, and he set it up in his bedroom and practiced every day. And where he started and where he ended, it was a monster improvement of just having that instrument accessible all the time.
Yeah, that was a really good foresight on his part.
Yeah,
it's part of that is just the accessibility of the instrument. It's a difficult thing.
Yeah. So after high school, did you go to UGA? Is that right?
I went to UGA.
Yeah. Who was on the percussion faculty when you were there?
Tony McCutcheon was the percussion professor there, and Arvin Scott was teaching drum set lessons there too.
Yeah, boy, how awesome is that, right?
Yeah, it was really great, and honestly, a similar situation, especially with like kind of the drum set at UGA. It seemed like there was always not like your crazy large pool of drum set, minded, very specific people, but there was always like this. There was always at least one guy, and as they were getting ready to finish school, there seemed to be always somebody that was there to kind of pick up where they left off, and there was kind of this line of really great drum set players there that honestly I learned just as much from those guys as they were older than me. Just like the preceding me there was Marlon Patton, and then just a little bit older than him was Darren Stanley. And both of those guys were still around, and I was still getting to go on some gigs where we were both there, like taking turns playing drum set. And like, this is like exponential lessons in practical application of actually getting somebody. It's like, hey, you just recently probably were not able to play like this, and now you are. And so I kind of set it up very nicely. In addition to all kinds of lessons learned from Dr. McCutcheon, both playing and not playing.
Yeah.
Again, some of those soft skills about being a working musician, because that guy, I mean, at that time, I mean, I don't know how he didn't just go crazy with the amount of stuff. Like, he had the full-time teaching job, and he was still playing, and like, he was just all over the place.
Yeah.
And which is part of the reason that, we got to start, filling in for him on gigs, because he's overbooked, so I got a lot of playing experience just from filling in for him in certain situations.
Yeah.
Which was really great.
What years were you at UGA? What period?
01 to 05 was when I was there. And I always did at least some summer school stuff. So I actually got out in 4 years. On the music ed track, which was not extremely common for people to do, because it's not really set up to be logistically possible.
Because it's like the degree and then the student teaching before you're
Yeah,
out.
yeah, and kind of the combination. Some things get kind of pushed out, but a lot of it was like combination ed and music, and it was just kind of too much stuff. But between some high school credits, giving me a little bit of a head start, and then doing summer stuff, I was in and out in 4 years.
Wow, that's great. And I'm assuming you played in all the ensembles there, right? I mean, and UGA's always had an incredible percussion studio, and I think Tim Adams is there now, and it's incredible. I have more perspective on the McCutcheon years through friends and being there for some events, and man, what an honor it has to be to get to study from McCutcheon and Arvin Scott. I mean, those guys are like some of the best educators out there, you know?
Yeah. And I was extremely fortunate in that regard.
Yeah. Did you have, in your formative years as a drum set player, did you have any big influences as far as players that you were listening to, bands or drummers in particular?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really in high school, I got really into as much like Latin jazz and like Latin fusion kind of stuff as I could possibly get. That was a lot of I just liked listening to that, and I liked kind of, I guess, the complexity of it rhythmically. And so I ended up listening to, the Michel Camilo stuff.
That's
like
the first name that came to my mind when you were saying that. Yeah. So good.
Yeah, like both like Weckl playing with him, and then that One More Once album.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly Cliff Almond, and maybe like Marvin Smitty Smith plays on like one of the tracks or something. And like I was not just that, but like anything like that I could consume. I was like super, super into it. And also a decent amount of like, progressive rock also. Like I was a pretty big Dream Theater guy in my high school days, which I find kind of funny now, because I don't, having been so big into it early on in my life, like I don't listen to much of anything like that anymore, and I don't really care to most of the time. But at the time it was I just really appreciated the complexity of it, and was so interested in that. It was just kind of trying to feed that like rhythmic and otherwise like information, just trying to like analyzing it with your ears. As
you were saying Dream Theater, it for some reason reminded me of one of my favorite gig moments ever, was when we opened a show for that Foreigner tribute band, and the guy and the drummer had that massive drum set. And
I loved that so much. like I wanted to use that guy's gear just for just for convenience.
Yeah.
At first, that was the only reason. And then I got there and I was like, I'm so glad that I got to play on this kit, because it was so over the top and so fun. But there was like a bass drum that wasn't even mic'd. It was just there.
He had a double bass. Yeah. I don't even know if was there even a pedal on it?
No, that's what I'm saying. There were two bass drums, and then he had a double pedal hooked up to the one that was mic'd. So the other one was just there for the theater of it all. And I was like, man, this is amazing. It was
amazing.
Yeah, that was a blast.
That's a lot of money for a visual. That's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, just the schlep. You think that's the biggest drum you have, and then you've got two of them, you know?
Yeah. That's like bringing 8 guitars and playing 2 of them.
I just hang these 3 behind me on racks, but I don't play them.
Yeah, I don't play them.
It's that.
That was. I need to look through my phone and see if because I remember taking a picture of you behind that.
Yeah,
kit.
I'm pretty sure I have one. Yeah, that's one that every once in a while I'll be talking to somebody and be like, I got to show you this. Like, I don't know if I can find it. I don't know if I can, but yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did you tour with Blast for a while? Did you do that? When was that?
That was directly out of college.
Really?
I finished my student teaching, the last semester of my degree in spring of '05. And then during that semester, while I was student teaching, I had made a tape and sent it into Blast because there were two UGA guys older than me that had already gone and been involved with that show. And so I think they knew somehow that the show had toured extensively through America, and then it started touring in Japan, and it got a lot of like a rebirth of it was very popular in Japan, and they were still touring in Japan, and they were going to start a new North American tour, and the two were going to overlap, so they had to recast a whole lot of new people.
Oh, wow.
And so there was like a call out for send in your stuff if you want to come do Blast kind of. And because I knew knew some of the guys from UGA that had done it, I was like, that's super cool. I'd gone to see it when it came to Atlanta and everything. I was like, man, this is really cool, and I would love to be involved with something like this. So why not make a tape and at least try? And yeah, I got that gig.
That's awesome. I saw it in Atlanta as well. So good. I guess for the people that are listening that may not be familiar with it, how would you describe, I guess, the evolution of how that happened? Because it started from Star of Indiana, right? The drum
Star of Indiana, and then they started, I don't know if it was after 93 or 94 or something like that. They started something called Brass Theater that was like a DCI marching band show indoors on a stage, and somehow over course of several years and some funding from some people that thought that was a really cool idea, got to be a Broadway style show that I think opened in London first, actually, and then it had a kind of brief Broadway run itself, but then started touring around, and anybody that's ever done marching band, getting to see that in a completely different context, not outside, not on a field, and the show itself is really, really well put together because it's kind of universal. It's about colors, and so that's part of the reason it did so well in Japan, because there's absolutely no translation necessary for it. It's all just playing and choreography, and it's very difficult to describe because there's not really anything like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was, I had played some other musicals, I guess, but not at a very, I'd played for a couple of them in high school or at other high school, not on a professional level, really. And it wasn't something that I was super focused on doing at all. Just it's something to play for, and that was kind of it. But doing the Blast thing for a year, the same production company the year following that, we're going to do a tour of Elton John, Tim Rice, Aida, that Broadway music. And so it came kind of the end of that Blast tour. They already had plans for that next tour. And so I said, hey, is there any chance that we can do that too? Can I keep, I was mainly the drum set player for the Blast thing. We played lots of stuff, but that was my focus there, which I look back on it. I was actually called to be a swing for that show. When Jeff Lee, the guy that was casting it, made the phone call, he was like, yeah, I think you could do a good job kind of playing sort of anything. You've got rudimental chops, and you can play drum set, you've got you can kind of do anything, and we need somebody that can kind of cover everything and be a swing. And I guess I just didn't know the difference, but I was just totally honest with it. I was like, oh, that's cool. I was actually more interested in playing drum set, honestly. And I just kind of, point blank just told him that. And I don't know how much effect that actually had on the situation, but eventually I wasn't the swing. I was the drum set player, and there was another guy who was the swing of that tour. And, that kind of put me on a certain path, right, that I don't know that I would have been on otherwise.
Wow. So. Yeah. I suppose it springboarded you into that next opportunity that then led into a lot of other opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And I want to get to that in a second. I wanted to ask about because I know a big component of that show is the theatrical element of it as well. How was that piece of it to you? Because the playing part for me would have been fine. I would have felt comfortable being on stage playing, but then having to have that entire, for lack of a better term, theatrical element of it, I would have had a little I would need to learn that a little bit. How was that for you?
It was not natural. It was not just like, oh yeah, it's cool. It was very uncomfortable in plenty of situations, and it was
Hmm.
probably I was maybe probably somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. There were people that were super like came easily to them, and there were also people that were more uncomfortable than I was. I would say, as far as that being a new idea to think
Yeah.
about your motivation while you're playing for how you're carrying your body and how you're projecting your face and all sorts of things like that that you don't normally necessarily even have to care about
Yeah.
as a player, and that's it. Um,
Yeah.
but the way that they went about it was really, I mean, it was a really, really cool and transformative experience during that rehearsal process, because we would have entire rehearsal blocks where you're not working on the show, you're just working at your ability to project yourself and your ability to like fully, connect with somebody just by looking at, and is doing all these kind of exercises that you might do in some sort of acting class or improv class with a room full of people. And I knew like, one or two of these people, and the rest of them were essentially total strangers. Eventually I'm, lifelong companions of these people because we've been on the road together and we've lived together and whatever. So, but at that time, they were basically strangers, and to do that kind of work, at first it's easy to kind of shrug it off and say like, yeah, but like that,
Yeah.
none of that's real though, right? You can say that all you want, but does it really do anything? I felt that. I saw it in other people, and I saw it in all of us, even from when we started touring and we had like gotten to a certain point, and then from that point, I mean, it got better and better. And after a while, we were seasoned performers,
Yeah.
very comfortable in all these things that just a few weeks ago we would have been like, no, that's not me. I'm not a person that can do that. That's
Yeah.
not my personality. And it basically taught you and forced you into that place.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really cool experience.
Yeah. Well, in thinking about that, if you think about DCI today or maybe WGI today, there's so much of that body movement theatrical element to it that really wasn't present in the indoor or field marching world prior to Blast. And I think maybe
Right.
that kind of changed the game on these ensembles going in that direction, is maybe seeing it on that in that arena and seeing it done by Blast. It might have kind of started that for those other groups.
Yeah, you definitely see all of the extra musical avenues of communication,
Yeah.
that are present there, that you can realize how powerful they are,
Yeah.
and how cool it is. Both, it's more enriching as a performer to perform in a situation like that, and of course, it's more all encompassing for an audience,
Yeah.
because you're not just getting a sound, and you're not just getting something that looks cool. The end. It's like, yeah, it looks cool, and there's purpose behind it, and there's emotion, and there's intent behind all those things, and it just gives a lot of layers to kind of peel back to a performance like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah, it's really cool. So after you finished with Blast, did they offer you a position, or did you ask if you could audition for this next
I
tour?
asked if I could audition, and I flew to New York to meet with the music supervisor for that tour, who had been one of the conductors of the show on Broadway, and one of the other percussionists in Blast. He and I both went, and we actually did like other auditions while we were there. Like we went in and like played a cold audition for some other tour, and then it was almost like an like a last minute ad, like, oh yeah, we should see if we can like meet up with that guy, like we talked about with the producers, and so we met him in a practice space and played through some things, and a really, really, awesome guy, in addition to being a great musical mind, and we kind of hit it off right away, all of us, and we were like, yeah, cool, so you guys, if you want to do this tour, then you can. And so then the next year, I was doing more of a traditional Broadway show where I'm in a pit, and not running around and flipping and climbing
Right.
up stuff, and flat ironing my hair for the show and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and just just showing up and playing, and getting to do the traditional, but not like old school Broadway, but like a modern rock pop
Right.
show of Elton John music, and that was just such an awesome experience
Yeah.
in so many ways that really got me to realize how much I liked playing musical theater,
Yeah.
because I like I said, that wasn't something that I was focused on or trying to strive for prior to.
Mm.
It just like, oh yeah, I enjoyed touring and I enjoy playing drum sets, so I did that. So now I'll just do this one. And then over the course of that year, I was like, man, every single thing about this, I love playing with vocalists. You got an ensemble full of great vocalists to listen to and play every night, I like the theatrical element of the playing that I've been doing. Well, that's still here.
Yeah.
The variety of and so it kind of, by the end of that tour, I was like, man, this is really something that I want to keep doing.
Yeah. Man, so did you move to New York as soon as that was finished?
No. I trying to remember what the end of the Aida tour, Blast was going to do a Japanese tour that was back to the big Broadway version of it. They had pared the size of the show down to be able to play in smaller houses and to be able to tour around Japan and these smaller cities. In some cases, it had been so popular that it was basically like, all of those old cats and a bunch of the new cats too, like put back into a larger cast again to do the Broadway size in Japan. And that was an opportunity that I didn't want to let go by.
No, absolutely not.
So that was like 2.5 or 3 months in Japan.
Oh yeah.
In only 3 cities. So like we were in Tokyo, like teching the show and then doing the run there for a while.
Wow, that sounds so terrible having to be.
It was just the worst.
Wow.
It was literally, and the funniest thing about that is that the coolest thing was that I just wanted to go to Japan.
Sure.
Right. Like I had always been kind of fascinated with that. And then getting over there, I was even more in love with it than I thought I would have been. Like everything about being there was just awesome. But what I didn't like wasn't even a part of the equation. I mean, wanting to do this gig was that the show was super crazy popular there. And it was the closest thing to like being a Beatle that I'll ever be. I mean, it was seriously like having to plan your exit after shows if you didn't want to be like mobbed by people. And
really,
it was the show now. The show was that popular, and just because we were a part of it, it was like, okay, so now you're some kind of super celebrity, even though I have no idea who you are. And I never did again. So that was kind of a side, like very surreal vibe of part of that tour. So yeah, I did the Japanese Blast, and then came home and thought that I was going to be back in Atlanta for a while. And then a few months later, the Aida tour was going to go to China, and I'd like started, like I like got an apartment and was like getting back into stuff in Atlanta, and they were like, hey, you wanna go to China and do that again? I was like, yeah, I really do.
Yeah, I think I do
want to do that.
Yeah.
And so, and I also, on that Chinese tour, my then girlfriend, now wife, we toured together. She came as the percussionist on that show.
Really?
Yeah. My wife Kelly, we were at UGA at the same time and have percussion degrees from UGA, and she marched Spirit of Atlanta in the front ensemble for several years. And we did WGI together and stuff like that.
I did not realize that she was a percussionist as well. That's crazy.
Yeah. And we had been dating most of the time that I've been touring, and that was part of the motivation for like, okay, I've been on the road for a while, like come home. And then I was like, I don't think my life is going to survive me just up and leaving and going to China. And then my friend who was the percussionist on the Aida tour was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that tour. I was like, oh, you're not going to do that tour? Oh. And then there was this whole, like, I don't want to be like weird about it, but like, can I recommend somebody? Like, can I send you a tape if I make a, audition tape with someone? And so we put something together and sent the music supervisor, who by that point I knew from, playing the show for more than a year. And he called me up and was like, hey, dude, is this your girlfriend? I And I was like, well, yeah, but I didn't want it to be like that. Like, she's a good percussionist and she was interested in doing the show too. So I didn't want it to be like, I didn't know how, how that would be received. And he was like, well, I mean, clearly she can play, but like, it's also nice that, you guys both want to be there. So yeah, like you didn't have to be secretive about it. I was like, well, I don't know. I've never done this before. I don't know how it works.
Well, yeah, that's keeping everything above board. That you didn't want it to you didn't want to put any pressure on anyone, right? That they have to offer her the gig because of her being your girlfriend, and yeah,
right. And of course, I didn't. And from the other side, I didn't want her to feel like that either. I wanted to be like, no, you can play. I know you can play. We'll just make a tape and make sure that it all kind of stays. Yeah. So that's the way that went down. But so how
long was that tour?
That was longer than the Jet tour. It's tougher to be in China. My joke is that if you ever get the chance, if you get the chance to go to China, just make sure your flight connects through Beijing. Connects through like Tokyo, and then just miss that flight. Just go, just stay. No, but it was obviously a very cool experience to be in China too. It was right after the Olympics were there.
Wow.
Just a few months earlier, going to see all the Olympic
all the venues and everything.
Yeah, that they had been just recently, and you'd seen them on TV, and then go and like see them in person. Yeah, that was super cool. But yeah, so that was more like a 4.5 month.
Wow.
Tour. Yeah.
So you guys got paid to go and be in China together, though. That's pretty. Yeah. That's pretty stinking cool.
We got paid, and we got to play together, and that was fun. And we got to go all over China and see all sorts of things. And we got to go see the pandas in Chengdu and stuff like that. It was there were a lot of difficult things about that, but it was also very, very, very cool.
Yeah. How does that work? Do you, when you're doing a tour like that, do they provide backline, or do you have to send over a kit for those type things?
Yeah, that was mostly that I was playing on all my stuff. I think there was an electronic roll-in pad that triggered some things that wasn't mine. That was theirs, but everything else for the North American tour and the Chinese tour was my kit. So like I literally put my kit on a slow boat a few weeks before I went to China. I like packed it up, and then I didn't get it back until a while after I came back and stuff like that. So that was a little nerve wracking.
Sure, but, I'm sure.
And the Blast has all its own stuff. All of the percussion equipment is owned by the show.
Yeah.
And so that was all provided stuff.
Has there ever been any talk about reviving that? Do you know if there's ever
Blast?
Yeah.
They're actually in Japan right now.
Really?
Yeah, they've done other things. They did a few more tours after I stopped. And then there was like a Blast 2 that they did maybe a couple of times with some success, mostly in Japan. And then they also did a Disney, like Blast does Disney. I think it was also all in Japan. And then they're over there right now. I don't know if they've started touring yet, or I don't know any of the people other than the people that are all my age or older than me are now like teaching the show.
Yeah.
They're like the people that are in charge of the rehearsal process and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's still going, but I don't know if there's any talk about it doing another tour or something in the States.
Yeah, it was a really cool show. I know they filmed it and released it on DVD back in the day, and it's really
they
cool.
used to show it on PBS occasionally and everything, and it was one of those. It was just a really, really cool thing. And honestly, like I feel like it's such a good show that it should be more well known than it is.
I agree.
By people that are not musicians, because that was the other thing about like fast forwarding a little bit to being in New York. Be like, yeah, what shows have you done? I was like, well, I did a couple of tours with a show called Blast, and there were a couple of people that knew what that was, and there were a couple of people that were like, what's Blast? And it had absolutely no, cred at all for me. It's like, oh yeah, I toured with this show, and luckily one of the guys that gave me one of my first chances to play, he had seen it before, and so he had some idea that it was a cool musical thing. But a lot of the people that I talked to were like, what's that?
Yeah, but and then everyone in the world knows what stomp is, but then you don't know what.
Exactly. And it's like, well, it's another kind of a weird niche thing, but maybe it was just marketed in a different
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
And every single person knows what that is.
right. Yeah. Wow. So how long were you in New York?
Well, I after the Chinese tour, there were a few months there of us just kind of saving up to move. At that point, my wife wasn't as interested in continuing to play, but she was interested in doing kind of like art administration, arts management stuff. And so, like either way, like she was also interested in moving to New York to try to have more opportunity for that. And I was at that point like, I really feel like I want to do more musical theater stuff. And she was like, well,
Let's do it.
you kind of have to go to New York to do that on like to make that sort of like a long-term goal, it seems like at that time. And so yeah, we moved up there and we were there for right at 5.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that long. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I know you've told this story 100,000 times probably, but you're gonna add one more to the counter. Because I find it to be so fascinating. And when I told Skylar that I was going to talk with you, he's like, make sure you ask him about in New York, because I just think it's crazy just what all you were doing. So essentially you were subbing on a bunch of different shows, right? How many
Yeah.
at a time were you working on?
The most that I was doing at a time was 6.
Holy cow.
That was at the height of it. That I was trying to figure it out when I did the clinic a few weeks ago, because I was like, somebody's going to ask that, and I don't really think about it. Like, how many total shows did I at some point work on? And I'm kind of fuzzy on it. It depends on like maybe 9 or 10 like Broadway shows, like proper, and then there's a few off Broadway shows also that I kind of group in there. So like something like 12 or 13 shows over the course of those 5 years, and not constantly, because I got the chance to sub on one pretty soon after moving, which what I was told was that, hey, you need to move up there and you need to have enough money to like not work for like a year minimum.
Oh.
Like just like move to New York and have enough money to be like, I don't have to work for like a year, just to be able to give yourself some time to try to break into this, because it's not going to be an immediate thing to break into. And I was able to sub on a show within 4 months of moving, and that was an insane stroke of luck, that just the timing of something worked out, where somebody had left a show and a new drummer took over, and it was right around the time that I was trying to get in touch with people to see if they would be, if there was any possibility of subbing for them, or just coming to just see them play without subbing. And he was like putting together a whole new sub roster for himself at the exact time that I got in touch with him. And I had been, I had no contact with some of the people that I had contacted. I'd been, very politely told like, yeah, no thanks, by a ton of people. And that was the first person that called me back and was like, yeah, I'm actually looking for subs right now. So if you want to come take a look at it and see if it's something you think you could do, then come on down. And in the same breath, that 4 months of not playing and not being able to do it seemed like an eternity.
Sure.
But I was very aware that I was also extremely lucky to get that shot that soon.
Yeah.
Moving up there. And so I played there, and I subbed on another show before that one closed. So I was kind of subbing 2 shows, but then both of them closed, and there was a period of a couple of years where I wasn't subbing on anything and other stuff, other gigs and other non-musical work in New York, to try to just stay there and keep at it before kind of breaking back in again and getting very busy doing what I was trying to do.
Yeah. So how does that work when you sub for someone? Do they send you the book and you read it down, make sure you're prepared? And I'm going to ask a lot of questions, so you can just maybe explain it. Everything with a click. And do you walk in carrying any instruments? Do you carry your own cymbals? How do the logistics of all of this work?
Usually you go in and meet with somebody if you don't know them already, and all these relationships were new for me. It was I was
Yeah.
meeting these people for the first time. I didn't have any other ties to them. And so it was like a kind of an informational meeting slash watch them play the show for the first time without even looking at the music necessarily, just to come check it out. And then, whether or not they were like, yeah, so that was cool, and maybe we'll explore this on down the line, or in some cases, the reason I had you here is because I'm actually looking for sub. So if you think, now that you've seen me do it, if you think this is something you can handle and want to take on the responsibility of doing, then let's schedule you coming back a few more times, maybe watching now with copies of the book to make notes on, and in some cases get recordings of, or whatever additional materials you may need or may be available. It kind of depends on the situation. I had shows that I subbed that they would send like a video of the conductor. They had a file of the conductor doing the whole show for you to use for whatever, if you wanted to. But that wasn't normal. That
Yeah.
wasn't like, oh yeah, you just send the conductor video. It's like, okay, well maybe if you have that, yeah, send it over. But otherwise, just copy of the music and making your own notes as to trying to emulate whoever you're covering, emulate their playing as much as you can,
Yeah.
because the show is this machine that's been churning for weeks or months or years in some
Yeah.
cases, and so you're very much trying to just fit yourself into that and not necessarily trying to,
Let me show you what I can do, right?
yeah, it's not a showy, like trying to prove yourself for your individuality's sake. It's very rarely that. You're there trying to fit in and trying to, like, I always approach this trying to play as much like the person that I was subbing for as I could, which I almost kind of viewed it as, it was like I was studying with them.
Mhm.
Without taking a lesson, but I was there, I was like checking out like the way they played. And, in some situations it's like there were fills that guys would play and I'd be like, I would never play that, and so I think it's going to sound weird if I play that, but I'm going to try, and then
Yeah.
if in my practice, if I don't think I'm pulling it off and I think it's just going to sound bad, then maybe I do something that is more authentic to me, but still gets the same point across,
Yeah.
things like that. But so you go and study the show a handful of times, and then your audition to be in the show is playing the show in front of paying customers on Broadway. there's no other like audition or rehearsal process involved. And so it's like, do as much homework as you can, and then show up and play it for real,
Yeah.
and play it with the people that have been playing it for a long time. And
Were you nervous as hell the first time?
yeah.
I'm sure.
I mean, I'm trying to think of, not that it maybe not the most, but like I'm trying to think of a more high pressure music performance situation
not counting
than
playing on that guy's foreigner drum set, right?
Right. Well, that was a lot of, just like emotional, like like the amount of stress involved in doing all that work, but outside, and then having it come down to the actual gig, like no real rehearsal to be spoken of, or anything like that. I can't imagine that there's a whole lot more stressful musical performance situations than a first show as a Broadway sub.
Right. Where the goal is that if no one notices you're there, then you did the job correctly.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, just make sure that the building doesn't catch on fire. And honestly, my whole goal in playing, my whole like philosophy of playing music from a drummer's perspective is to make the music feel good for everybody else. That's just that's the most important thing to me.
Yeah.
As a player, and to have that kind of responsibility in a situation where you're not comfortable at all. It's like, I want to make this feel good for you, but I don't know how, because I haven't been here. And so having to really, really learn on the fly, and having to, listen to an insane degree as you're playing. And then there's just a lot of preparation. I think, one of the reasons that I was successful at it is that I did a ton of preparation. I mean, there's no other way to do it. There's no amount of talent that you can skate by in a Broadway situation, because some of the things that you're talking about are not musical. Some of the things that you're talking about, it's not like, oh yeah, I'm a good musician, so I'll just pick it up. It's like, no, you have to, like, this is not the music stuff. This is other stuff that has nothing to do with the music, but yet is your job, because otherwise stuff will fall apart.
Right.
For singers, for dancers, for lights, for all sorts of things as part of the show. And so yeah, it's a very, very high stress, but also that's the thing. It was like super high stress, and I really, really loved it and got into it.
Sure.
And I eventually got better at it. I got better at playing the first show, and I got a little bit more confident in my my ability to know exactly what to latch onto and what to ask the conductor right before, if there was anything that you have any questions about anything? Yes, as a matter of fact, I have a list of things that I want to ask you right before we start this show. And it's like, oh, good. So you're thinking about this. That makes me feel better. That means we're going to have a good time, and some of those other, like I said, from an early age, soft skills of gigging that I definitely, I think, kind of leaned on to try to make that whole insanely impossible situation, as possible as it can be.
Yeah. Well, it feels like everything was kind of along the path, was kind of preparing you for you being very well equipped to step into that type of role and do it successfully.
Yeah. I eventually I felt that way. I was like, there's all this having to be super, like, play it the same way every time stuff that, the marching band and rudimental stuff that I focused on for so long was like, that's what it's all about. And then there's all this, like, but drop of a hat, you might have to, like, change something or switch up, or it's live theater, anything can happen too. And it's like, oh, well, I'm a jazz player, so I'm used to following and just kind of like jumping and changing things. There's like a lot of different skill sets from different areas that all kind of converge.
Yeah.
That I just really, it fascinates me, and so I don't know, I just focused on it, and I think that's the reason why I was able to have some success with it.
Yeah. I remember saying to you at some point on a gig, and I do think that this is not all drummers can do this well, and you do it quite well, is to be able to maintain a good groove, a good deep pocket while playing at a very low volume. And I know a lot of great drummers that just tend to, it's either 10 or it's 0, and I'm sure that a lot of this, and of course the classical training of playing with a lot of dynamics, I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. But I imagine this part of your playing really got developed at playing a wide range of dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say that I eventually I had to learn how to play loud, but that was stepping outside a comfort zone, because I had grown up playing in, small wedding venues sometimes, or in restaurants, or, that kind of thing where, like, there's no way that you can be soft enough.
Yeah.
Like, you literally, like, you're like, you walk into the place and you, like, put a cymbal on and you touch it, and it's like, that's too loud for this room. Like, we shouldn't be playing in here.
Yep.
But this is where the gig is, and I played in so many settings like that early on when I was literally a kid, that was just always a part of it for me. It's like making sure that you can't play too loud, because you can't listen if you're playing so loud that you can't hear what's going on. And obviously that's the most important thing, is being able to hear who you're playing with, and making sure that we're communicating and everybody feels good. And so that was extremely important. But then I got to some situations with some shows where the expectation was very much a hard rock in a isolated sound booth drum sound, which is like, what we want you to do is play the drums literally as hard as you can. And I was like, you mean like this loud? And they're like, no, louder than that. Like it's got to be. And I would go and watch some of these guys play and be like, oh, like that? Sure. Like, no, there's no way that he can be doing this every night. And
don't they have microphones on the drums? I mean, what
the desired, for some of these styles and whatever, the desired sound is the drum being hit as hard as it can be. And then they want to control the sound from the board.
Wow.
It doesn't mean that the drums are loud in the mix or out in the house, it's not like you're hearing a ton of drums, but like for everybody in the pit, they're used to hearing somebody playing at an absurd volume, like for every single note.
Wow.
And that was really that was one of the things that like later on I played on some shows that were like that, and that was one of the hardest things for me to do. I was playing the show and practicing, and I wasn't even practicing the music as much as I was just like weight training on the drum. I was like just like, okay, I have to be able to play like this and not stop for 2 hours or 2.5 hours. And I don't even know what that feels like. I've
Oh,
never done
wow.
that before. But that's what, that's again, that was what was expected from that show and that gig. And so I worked on that a lot for some of those shows. And now I'm probably a much louder player than I used to be because of that. I've kind of incorporated that. And so in some settings, I'm like, oh yeah, I know how to play super soft. I just, I just didn't, I wasn't asked to do that
Right.
very often. So yeah, it just kind of depends on the setting.
Yeah. What is the
But
what was the most
it's good to have that range, I guess.
Sure, absolutely. What do you, if you can remember back musically, what was the what were some of the more difficult shows you played while you were up there?
The very first one that I subbed on was called Next to Normal, and I don't know if you're familiar with that show. It's absolutely brilliant. I think it won the Tony for best score. And then it eventually won like a Pulitzer Prize
Oh, wow.
because it's also like a super heavy thing about mental illness and how it can affect a family, and it's like a beautiful show. But seriously, like front to back, the playing in it is just ridiculous. The guy that originated the book, really, really talented guy and very, very technically active player. And he was like, yeah, I mean, he was, developing the show and just kind of developed it. It was like, yeah, this is the way these tunes go. Not overplaying, but like getting to play a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think it was kind of known, for the couple of years that show ran, that people that had heard it were like, oh yeah, like that was the first one I got to sub, and then I got asked back to do it. And it also had some pretty exposed mallet stuff in it too. It was like really, really cool, like groove rock stuff, and then you'd have to stop and like play some vibe chords to go with stuff, and it was very, very very challenging for a lot of different
Wow.
mostly because it was just that good. Like I would listen to that music right now. I would just like turn it on and just listen to it because it's really, really brilliantly written. And so I would definitely say, like right off the bat, I just like got this really, I could have played for a revival of Oklahoma, and I would have been super stoked to do it. But it just so happened that the first one that I got to play was that, and it was really, really cool.
Yeah.
Um, Book of Mormon was the one that I got to play the most, and I loved that show. And all of the variety that is in it, and that was a lot of fun. And all of the players there in a relatively small orchestra were just, in addition to being ridiculous players, also really, really nice people. So that was a really good one. Wicked was also probably, in some ways, for some reasons, my favorite one to play, just because I really, really unapologetically like that show still.
Oh, there's some good parts in it too. I mean, musically, there's. I'm just thinking back on some of the tunes. I mean, I imagine as a drummer, it's probably a lot of fun to play that show. Yeah, there's
Yeah,
some
yeah, and
good
it's like
parts.
these heavy, heavy groove stuff, and then instantly goes to some like orchestral feeling
Hmm.
stuff, and then back with just some of the fun challenge of it. Side note: my 7-year-old daughter is just now getting super into Wicked, so it's on like all the time at my house, and it's very, very surreal for me to listen to those songs, and it's like, oh
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And then I guess the ones that I was talking about, I did a revival of, I subbed on a revival of Rent
Hmm.
that was off Broadway for a while, and also played on Kinky Boots just a few times. That was probably the one that I played the least, but had some of the most preparation to do it because it was very involved. And both of those shows were those situations I was talking about where they were like, hey, what we want is for you to play loud.
Really.
Like, just like, don't hold back, hit the drums. It's not going to sound right if you just kind of like, listen your way through and play along with us. You're going to have to hit. And so those were the ones that were kind of eye opening to me as far as like pushing that level of my playing.
Yeah, I've seen some videos where the drummer, the percussionist, might be in a separate room from the rest of the orchestra. Were you in ever any situations like that?
Yeah, Kinky Boots was like that. He was actually set up in like it was like up towards the balcony where some lighting. It was like literally the opposite end of the theater. He was like back behind the house. And in a like a stairwell, there was a little room in between like a long galley dressing room and that led to the like spotlight. There was a little room there that was not much more than just a transition from one room to like past a stairwell to another room. That's where the drums were set up. And yeah, that was super weird. And I had done, the thing is, I had done that a lot on tour. There were some times where we would be in a pit that was big enough to have everybody there, and they would put, some plexi around. I didn't have like a booth on that tour. It was just plexiglass some of the time. But then some of the time the pit would either be too small or too shallow, and they'd be like, oh, the drums are going to, people in the front row, it's going to be a problem. And so they'd just find somewhere else to put the drums. And I'd be like back by some dressing rooms or in a dressing room or in a glorified janitor's closet or in a stairwell. I played once in the bottom of a stairwell, and it just sounded like Zeppelin the whole time. I mean, to me, it probably didn't sound any different, in the show. But yeah, so I'd done a fair amount of that on the tours.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes the drums were the only thing that was that isolated, and everybody else was in the pit. Sometimes, everybody's in the pit, obviously, and then sometimes the entire orchestra is elsewhere, not in a traditional pit, and kind of everything in between. It's just depending on the needs of the show and the logistics of the space and the personality of the sound guy. Like whether he will a certain degree of control that they want or are not worried about or whatever. It just kind of depends.
And then a video rig with no latency, right?
Yeah, absolutely not. No, actually, that usually works pretty well. That was the thing. It wasn't the weirdest thing about like the Kinky Boots thing was finishing the first act of the show and then going down like 4 flights of stairs and across this long hallway to be like, hey guys, what's up? That was it's good. Oh yeah, were you here? I didn't even know you were here. Oh, cool, man. Okay, I got to start running back up, otherwise I'm going to miss the second act. So I'll see you guys later. And it's like the transit time to even pretend like you were there with other musicians was a little bit crazy. But honestly, the video conductor rigs never seemed to give me any trouble.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, just picturing you.
And honestly, the most important thing is that, more of the shows that I played had conductors that were also playing a keyboard book than just a traditional conductor. I did a few that had a traditional conductor, but a lot of them, the MD conductor was also playing. And I just, that's so much more helpful information. Is what they could say that as long as you're starting together, as soon as they play anything, you get to be like, oh, that's where
it's sitting.
That's where you'd like this. Yes. I remember you play it a little differently than this other conductor when he does it, and once you hear him play, you know exactly what they want it to be. Better than you ever could from somebody giving you visual information. That's my kind of bias on that. So as long as I could hear everybody and have a good in-ear monitor mix, I was like, yes, whereas a lot of people are like, oh, you don't need all that stuff. You just gotta, want to hear the real sounds in the room and everything. I was like, I really appreciate the level of detail that I can get from hearing the sound, off of a mic right in front of somebody, whether they're down the street from me or whether I'm next to them.
Exactly.
And so I'm a big fan of playing in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, it's just so fascinating to hear that period of your life. I mean, I'm sure you look back on it now and you're like, pretty cool I got to do that. I mean, it's quite incredible that the opportunities you got to have in that period of time.
Yeah, it's really, really surreal. The music supervisor that I flew to New York and auditioned for, I very specifically remember this. He was also at the rehearsal process for the China tour of Aida when we were rehearsing it over there. Some of the musicians were the same, some of them were different. And while we were over there, I remember specifically like hanging out after hours and talking about how he had heard about the South Park guys were writing a musical. And we were all sitting around, hanging out, being like, man, how cool would it be to work on the musical that the South Park guys are putting together? Man, that's so, and just kind of like,
Oh, that's great.
talking about it. And then, fast forward a few years, I got to I got to sub that show. And the guy took a leave of absence to play another show. And I got to play there for a few months in a row. It was my gig,
yeah,
like I was officially like comfortable, the most comfortable that I ever got anywhere, because I was actually able to do it over and over.
yeah.
And it was like, yeah, that happened. We were talking about like it would be cool to do that, and I got to do
I
it.
got to do it.
That was pretty cool.
Man, that is awesome. That is awesome. Before we wrap up, I want to ask about your teaching career. I want to chat a little bit about that because I think you're teaching elementary music. Is that right?
I had been teaching elementary.
Okay, you had
Yeah,
been.
I'm not teaching anything currently right now.
Okay.
But most recently, I was
You were
teaching
teaching, and was it like teaching percussion instruments, teaching vocal stuff, a little bit of everything? How was all of that?
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything. I did not plan on I didn't see myself doing that ever. That was not something that I had aspirations necessarily to do. But after teaching middle school and high school and doing a lot of high school, focused on the marching band drumline stuff and starting a family and the hours that are involved in the marching band stuff and all that, was looking to make a shift there. And I explored the possibility of teaching elementary school with a couple of people, and interviewed places and stuff like that. But had a friend from college that had been doing that, and he was a percussionist, and he had sort of been able. He was in a very specific situation where he was able to kind of mold this program at the elementary school. They had a chorus that he was in charge of, but he also did like a Orff ensemble, or mallet ensemble.
Yeah.
And he had a pretty big group there, and it was a big focus of what he was doing at the school, and he was leaving to teach somewhere else. And it just so happened that was at the same time that I was exploring the possibility of doing that and making that switch. And he kind of told his administration at the school, like, yeah, if you want to get somebody to continue what I'm doing right now, if you want that to keep on going, I think this would be a person that was able to do it. And I honestly, he's not, I don't think I would be doing him a disservice. He's not a big singer. He was really, really focused on the percussion aspect of it. I actually love singing and do as much of it as I am allowed to and can, and really have a very strong feeling of the best way to teach music on a basic level to kids is through singing and through playing percussion instruments, because it's the most like automatic. Like any other instrument, there's that huge learning curve of like you got to be working on it for a long time before you even have the chance of getting it to sound the way that it's really supposed to sound. But a lot of percussion instruments, not saying there's not a technique to it, but you get the sound automatically, right? You don't have to have the perfect technique to get the sound to happen. And so it's just a much more like immediate, if you're talking about teaching the fundamentals of what music is and how we make sounds together and what possibilities there are, I feel like your singing and percussion instruments are the most accessible ways to do that. And so I kind of, focused it that way. It was like, yeah, so we're going to sing, we're going to, I didn't teach recorder at the school where I was. That wasn't something that he had done, so it wasn't expected of me, because he had all these mallet and kind of focused it more that way, but a lot of hand drumming too and drum circle kind of thing. So I was able to kind of fit in and do a lot of the things that he had done before and experiment with doing some of my own stuff. So that was a pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah, I'm sure the middle school band director or directors were really happy to receive these students moving up to middle school that had a good foundation of rhythm, because you've worked with middle school kids. Sometimes they're pretty deficient in that respect, and it really takes a long time to get them on the path where you wanting them to go. And them having that foundation had to be a great head start for those programs.
Yeah, I mean, just the concept of ensemble playing, just playing together and trying to keep rhythms together. I hope that was something that was helpful. Yeah.
And at any point, you could have looked at them and said, "Listen, when I was your age, I was already playing gigs. So, what's your excuse?"
That was the other thing. It's like how you can just hear. I don't know that necessarily.
Yeah.
But you could, but I can't expect you to.
Yeah.
So yeah, it kind of changes. But yeah, the blessing of having all those great musical experiences so early in my life is also occasionally a bit of a curse, and because it's just like this. No, that's a very random, weird thing that no other humans do.
Yeah,
it's just part of my life that I have to accept.
Right?
Is a very strange thing. Yeah,
I'm the exception here, right?
Yeah, it's not you, it's me. So yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Well, man, Drew, I could sit here and talk to you forever. I'm just your story is just, it's so interesting, so fun, and it's great to see your face and catch up with you, and I'm just happy where your life is, man. It just seems like you're doing really well. I'm really happy for you guys.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This is so much fun, and yeah, I suppose putting an end time on something is necessary, because I would just sit here and talk and talk and talk.
Yeah, I would do the same thing. I would do the same thing. So yeah, it's otherwise it's going to be it's going to be a 3-hour episode, and people are going to be like, all right, what's going on, Brad? So we'll plan on a part 2, and we'll just pick up where we left off, and
that sounds good.
We'll just go from there. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it, and best of luck to you.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
Thanks for listening to the Bandwich Tapes. I'm your host, Brad Williams. The show's theme is called Playcation and was written by Mark Mundy. Drop me a line at the email address, thebandwichtapes@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe to receive new episodes of the podcast. And while you're at it, please tell someone else about the show. Thanks for listening.